The Audacity of Hope by Barack Obama. Picture this. You've poured everything into your dreams. The best schools? Check. Hard work? Check. Years dedicated to serving others? Check. Then you decide to go for it. You challenge a powerful incumbent for high office. And you get absolutely crushed. Not just defeated, but humiliated. The kind of loss that makes you replay every decision at 3 in the morning. The kind that slaps you awake with a cold truth: life doesn't care about your plans. In the aftermath, you're standing at an airport rental counter, and your credit card gets declined. You can't even get a floor pass to your own party's convention. The rising star? Gone. Now you're just another person watching from the cheap seats, wondering if the world moved on without you. This isn't hypothetical. This was Barack Obama's reality after losing a congressional race in 2000. It was a moment of soul-crushing doubt when the dream felt dead and the path forward seemed to vanish. He stood at that crossroads we all face eventually. Accept your limits and move on, or refuse to accept defeat and risk becoming bitter and pathetic. What happened next became one of the most remarkable political journeys in modern history. But more than that, it's the story of an idea forged in that moment of defeat and tested on lonely drives through endless cornfields, in church basements, and around kitchen tables with ordinary people. He called it The Audacity of Hope. Today, we're diving into his book of that same name. This isn't just a political memoir. It was written before he became president, when he was a new senator trying to make sense of a deeply fractured America. It's a profound meditation on how we might find our way back to each other in a world that seems determined to pull us apart. So what's my promise to you? By the end of our time together, you won't just understand the political landscape that shaped a future president. You'll have a framework for thinking about your own life, your own values, and your own role in the world. You'll understand the deep historical forces that create cynicism and division. But more importantly, you'll discover the quiet, powerful threads of shared values that, if we have the audacity to pull on them, can still stitch our country back together. This is a journey into the heart of the American experiment, and it starts with a simple, powerful question. In the face of doubt and division, where do we find the courage to hope? When a young Barack Obama first arrived in Washington as a senator in 2005, he felt like a rookie showing up to a game that was already over. His uniform was spotless while his teammates were mud-splattered and nursing their wounds. His own campaign had been touched by an almost spooky good fortune, a series of unlikely events that cleared his path to victory. But for his Democratic colleagues, the recent election had been brutal. They'd lost the presidency, House seats, and Senate seats. The country, and therefore Washington, was more divided than at any time in recent memory. He described the Senate, supposedly the world's greatest deliberative body, as a place where, ironically, no one was listening. Speeches were delivered to near-empty chambers, with politicians talking past each other for the benefit of C-SPAN cameras. It was, as he called it, the dead zone that politics has become, where narrow interests fought for advantage and ideological minorities tried to impose their absolute truths on everyone else. It's a feeling you might recognize. Whether you lean left or right, you can probably sense it in your gut. The lack of honesty, the constant fighting, the feeling that our biggest challenges are being ignored while our leaders squabble over petty, trivial things. We're served a continuous menu of false choices. You're either for big government or no government at all. You either support the troops unconditionally or you're unpatriotic. How did we get here? Obama traces this deep division back to the social upheavals of the 1960s. Before then, politics was less ideological. The Democratic Party was a strange coalition of Northern liberals, Southern segregationists, and big city machine bosses, all held together by the economic promises of the New Deal. The Republican Party was also a mix of different philosophies. But the 60s changed everything. The civil rights movement, protests against the Vietnam War, the rise of feminism, the counterculture. These movements didn't just challenge laws, they challenged a way of life. Politics was no longer just about your pocketbook. It became personal. It was about your identity, your morality, your very definition of what America should be. For many, especially working-class white voters, this new liberalism felt like an assault on everything they held dear: family, faith, flag, and neighborhood. This backlash created an opening, and a new, more ideological brand of conservatism, pioneered by figures like Ronald Reagan, rushed in to fill it. Reagan spoke to America's deep longing for order, patriotism, and personal responsibility. He gave people a sense of common purpose that liberals, at the time, seemed to have lost. This narrative, born from the conflicts of the 60s, has proven incredibly durable. It continues to drive our political discourse today, trapping us in a cycle of us versus them. Obama saw this firsthand during his 8 years in the Illinois state legislature. When Republicans were in power, they used the rules to shut Democrats out completely. When Democrats took control 6 years later, they did the same thing to Republicans. The friendly dinners and backroom compromises of a bygone era were replaced with implacable anger and a desire for revenge. This was the world he stepped into, a world of bitter partisanship, where compromise looked like weakness, and your opponents weren't just people you disagreed with, they were the enemy. But in this environment, Obama harbored a belief, a hope, that things could be different. He believed voters were tired of the name-calling and soundbite solutions. He believed that if he could just talk to them directly, explain the real choices we faced, their instincts for fairness and common sense would prevail. This belief wasn't just a political strategy. It was the very foundation of his candidacy for the Senate. That campaign became his laboratory for hope. Without the support of the party machine, he had to build his campaign from the ground up. He spent his days driving alone across the vast, flat landscapes of Illinois, from the bustling wards of Chicago to quiet farm towns miles from anywhere. He'd drive for hours, sometimes to meet with just 2 or 3 people gathered around a kitchen table. He didn't do much talking at first. He just listened. He listened to people talk about their jobs, their back pain, the local school, their anger at both Democrats and Republicans. He listened to them talk about what they saw right in front of them: a factory that had closed down, a promotion they'd finally gotten, a parent in a nursing home, a child taking a first step. And in all these conversations, a powerful truth began to emerge. He realized that despite all the differences in race, religion, and region, people's hopes were remarkably modest and strikingly similar. They believed that anyone willing to work should be able to find a job that pays a living wage. They believed you shouldn't have to go bankrupt just because you get sick. They believed every child, not just the wealthy ones, deserved a genuinely good education and a chance to go to college. They wanted to feel safe in their communities. They wanted clean air and clean water, and they wanted to retire with dignity. That was about it. It wasn't a radical agenda. These people didn't expect the government to solve all their problems. They believed in hard work and personal responsibility. But they also believed that government should help give every person a decent shot at life. It was in these conversations that Obama found his voice. He found confirmation of an idea he had long held, that what binds us together as Americans is so much stronger than what drives us apart, and that if enough people believe in that simple truth and are willing to act on it, we can get meaningful things done. This realization, born not in a university classroom or a political strategy session, but on the backroads of Illinois, became the central message of his campaign. It was the audacity of hope. But as he would soon discover, holding on to that hope in the face of the political machine is one of the hardest things a person can do. Because the world of politics is not built on hope. It's built on ambition, money, and, most of all, fear. One of the first things you learn in politics is that it's a full-contact sport. But the driving emotion isn't just the desire to win. It's the paralyzing fear of losing, not just losing an election, but the fear of total, complete public humiliation. Obama learned this lesson the hard way. In 2000, long before he was a national figure, he challenged a sitting congressman named Bobby Rush. It was ill-considered from the start. His own polls showed he had almost no name recognition. Then, tragedy struck when his opponent's son was killed, and Obama rightly suspended his campaign for a month. Later, while on a short family vacation in Hawaii, he missed a key vote in the state legislature. The next day, a front-page story made it sound like he had chosen vacation over duty. His campaign manager called him, painting a picture of the devastating political ad that could come from it: palm trees, a Mai Tai, and a voiceover saying, "While Chicago suffered, Barack Obama." From that point on, he knew in his bones he was going to lose. He woke up every morning with a sense of dread, having to spend the day smiling and shaking hands, pretending everything was fine. On election night, the race was called before he even arrived at his own party. He had lost by over 30 points. Unlike most people who get to lick their wounds in private, a politician's failure is on full display. The cheerful concession speech to a half-empty room, the awkward calls to pay off campaign debt. It's a feeling, he says, that most people haven't experienced since high school, when they were publicly rejected or failed at a critical moment. It's a feeling most adults wisely organize their lives to avoid. When Obama first decided to run for the Senate, his consultant sat him down and explained the brutal math. A single week of TV ads in Chicago would cost $500,000. The total budget for the primary alone would be around $5 million. He went home that night and made a list of everyone he knew who might donate. His grand total came to just $500,000. So he did what every candidate without personal wealth has to do. He started cold calling rich people. It was miserable. People would hang up on him. Secretaries would take messages that were never returned. He felt like his grandfather, who had sold life insurance and hated having to impose on people. At the end of 3 months, his campaign was far short of its goal. To make matters worse, he was running against a self-financing candidate, a man who had sold his company for over $500 million. One morning, Obama left his condo and found the entire neighborhood blanketed in his opponent's campaign signs, as if they had sprung up overnight like daisies in spring. Then the TV ads started, 6 months before the election, running around the clock. His supporters began to panic. Obama had to hold his nerve. He explained that his campaign only had enough money for 4 weeks of ads, and they couldn't afford to blow it all so early. He had to trust his message, trust the people he had met, and have the audacity to believe it would be enough. He got lucky. His campaign started to generate a mysterious quality called buzz. Small donors started sending in money over the internet. And his wealthy opponent, for all his money, never ran a single negative ad against him. In the final weeks, just as Obama's own ads began to run, his opponent's campaign imploded over a personal scandal. But the experience changed him. He found himself spending more and more time with people of means, investment bankers, hedge fund managers, law firm partners. They were smart, interesting people, but their perspective was that of the top 1%. They had no patience for unions, and weren't sympathetic to people whose lives were upended by globalization. He realized that the longer you're in this world, the more you move in a different orbit from the very people you entered public life to serve. The problems of ordinary people become abstractions to be managed, not battles to be fought. It's not just money that shapes a politician. It's the special interest groups. To get an endorsement, you have to fill out their questionnaires. These are not subtle. They are a series of litmus tests. If elected, will you solemnly pledge to get one answer wrong, and you could lose their support, their volunteers, their mailing lists? Get them all right, and you've locked yourself into the same rigid, partisan thinking you promised to end. Then there's the media. For a politician, the media is the filter through which everything is seen. As he puts it, I am who the media says I am, and the media thrives on conflict, not civility. It rewards attacks and simplifies everything into easy-to-digest narratives. A vote that runs against type is immediately labeled, quote, calculating. A vote that fits the narrative is just what's expected. He tells a story about giving a speech on Abraham Lincoln, where he tried to make a point about Lincoln's humanity and capacity to overcome struggles, relating it to the universal American belief that we can remake ourselves. A few months later, he adapted the speech for a magazine essay and personalized it slightly, saying Lincoln's journey reminded me not just of my own struggles. Almost immediately, a prominent conservative columnist, Peggy Noonan, wrote a piece titled Conceit of Government, accusing him of comparing himself to Lincoln, only sort of better. She wrote, so far it is also a greatness-free zone. If he keeps talking about himself like this, it always will be. Ouch. It was a sharp lesson. Every word a politician says will be scrutinized, dissected, and twisted. Spontaneity becomes dangerous. Passion is suspect. Soon, even the candid moments become scripted. You internalize the censors until you start to sound like, well, a politician. And in this media environment, facts themselves become negotiable. Obama recalls the brilliant Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who once told a colleague in a heated debate, "You are entitled to your own opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts." That no longer holds true. We are splintered into 1,000 media fragments, each with its own version of reality. So if the entire system seems designed to foster division, cynicism, and inauthenticity, where do we find a way forward? For Obama, the answer lies in rediscovering the core values that we as Americans still hold in common. The debate over values in politics is often a trap. It's used as a wedge to divide people, usually centered on hot-button issues like gay marriage or abortion. But Obama argues that Democrats are wrong to run away from this debate. The language of values is the map people use to navigate their world. The real question is, what are the core values that can unite us? He starts with the words that are our common creed, the foundation of our democracy. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. This is where it all begins. The radical idea of individual freedom, the right to be left alone, but also the positive idea of opportunity, the belief that through hard work, discipline, and personal responsibility, each of us can rise above our circumstances. But our individualism has always been balanced by a set of communal values: family, community, patriotism, and faith in something bigger than ourselves. The genius of America has been our ability to negotiate the tension between these two strands, the individual and the community. The problem arises when we see these values in absolute terms. Self-reliance can curdle into selfishness. Patriotism can slide into jingoism. Faith can calcify into self-righteousness. Finding the right balance is the hard work of democracy. Too often, though, we don't even try. Conservatives who bristle at government interference in the marketplace show little concern for government wiretapping. Liberals who fiercely defend freedom of the press often draw a blank when you talk about the costs of regulation on a small business owner. What if, he asks, we started by acknowledging that the values of the other side are also worthy of respect? What if liberals acknowledged that a recreational hunter feels the same way about his gun as they do about their library books? What if conservatives recognize that most women feel as protective of their reproductive freedom as evangelicals do of their right to worship? This isn't about abandoning our principles. It's about finding a starting point for conversation. He shares a story from his time in the Illinois Senate, when he sponsored a bill to require the videotaping of police interrogations in capital cases. The police were opposed, fearing it would hamstring them. Some death penalty opponents were opposed, fearing that reforming the system would make it harder to abolish. It seemed like a hopeless deadlock. Instead of focusing on their disagreements, Obama brought everyone to the table and focused on a single value they all shared: that no innocent person should end up on death row. By grounding the debate in that shared principle, they were able to work through the technical problems and pass the bill unanimously. It was a small victory, but it showed that a different kind of politics was possible. This requires a deep and often overlooked quality: empathy. He says it is at the heart of his moral code, something he learned from his mother. Whenever she saw him being cruel or thoughtless, she would look him in the eye and ask, "How do you think that would make you feel?" It's a question he believes we, as a country, are not asking ourselves enough. He says we are suffering from an empathy deficit. We wouldn't tolerate failing schools if we imagined that the children in them were our own. A CEO would find it much harder to give himself a multi-million-dollar bonus while cutting his workers' health care if he saw them as his equals. Those in power might think longer and harder about war if they envisioned their own sons and daughters in harm's way. Empathy isn't just about feeling sorry for people. It's a call to stand in someone else's shoes and see the world through their eyes. And it calls all of us to task: the powerful and the powerless, the conservative and the liberal. It forces us out of our complacency and beyond our limited vision. No one is exempt from the call to find common ground. This brings us to one of the most contentious battlegrounds in our country: the meaning of our Constitution. For many, the Constitution has become another weapon in the culture wars. On one side, you have strict constructionists, who argue that we must follow the original intent of the Founding Fathers. Their view is that liberal judges have been making up the law, finding rights that don't exist in the text, and subverting the will of the people. On the other side, many liberals see the courts as the last line of defense against a radical agenda to roll back civil rights, women's rights, and environmental protections. Obama, who taught constitutional law for 10 years, offers a third way of looking at it. He was deeply influenced by an older senator, Robert Byrd, who was seen as the very embodiment of the Senate. Byrd carried a copy of the Constitution with him everywhere and revered it like the Bible. But Byrd's life was also full of contradictions. He had been a member of the Ku Klux Klan in his youth, an association he long disavowed, and had joined other Southern senators in resisting civil rights legislation. Yet later in life, he became a hero to liberals for his principled opposition to the Iraq War. For Obama, Byrd's journey reflected the central contradiction of America's founding: a government built on the genius of liberty, yet blind to the whip and the chain. He argues that we can't treat the Constitution as a static, fixed document. The founders themselves disagreed profoundly on its meaning, and they couldn't have anticipated the challenges of our modern world, from the Internet to data mining. An original understanding of the 14th Amendment, for example, would have allowed for segregation and discrimination against women. Few of us would want to return to that. So is the Constitution just about power, with each side twisting it to get the outcome they want? Obama says no. He suggests we shift our metaphor. The Constitution is not a house to be built from a fixed blueprint. It is a conversation to be had. Its genius is that it provides a framework and a set of rules for how we, a big, noisy, diverse people, can argue about our future. Its separation of powers and checks and balances are designed to force us into a deliberative democracy. They compel us to entertain the possibility that we are not always right, to persuade others of our point of view, and to build shifting alliances of consent. Implicit in its structure is a rejection of all absolute authority and all absolute truth. It's a document built on a fundamental humility, the idea that we are all imperfect and that our judgments are fallible. This framework for conversation has worked for over 200 years. It has been tested by war, depression, and massive social change, but it broke down completely only once, over the one subject the founders refused to talk about: slavery. Deliberation alone could not grant the slave his freedom. In the end, it was the sword that severed his chains. This leads him to Lincoln, the man who understood both the power and the limits of deliberation. Lincoln held a deep conviction that slavery was wrong, but his presidency was guided by a profound practicality. He was willing to test bargains, to appoint and discard generals, to stretch the Constitution to its breaking point, to save the Union. For Lincoln, it wasn't about abandoning conviction for expediency. It was about holding two contradictory ideas at once: that we must always talk and seek common ground, because none of us can be certain that God is on our side, and yet at times we must act as if we are certain, protected from error only by providence. It is this balance between principle and pragmatism, conviction and humility, that offers a path forward. With this framework of values, empathy, and a living constitution, Obama turns to the great challenges of our time. He begins with the economy, framing the central issue of our age through two visits he made during his Senate campaign. The first was to the headquarters of Google in Silicon Valley. It felt like a college campus, with gourmet chefs, video games, and brilliant young engineers working on projects that seemed to be spinning the world into a single, thrumming conversation of light. It was the picture of America's future, dynamic, innovative, and global. But as he watched a presentation of new hires, their faces flashing on a screen, he noticed something. Half were Asian, many were Eastern European. Not a single one was Black or Latino. An executive told him they hired the top graduates from the top engineering programs, and you could count the number of Black and Latino kids in those programs on two hands. The engine of the new economy was leaving entire communities behind. Soon after, he took another trip, this time by car, to a town called Galesburg in western Illinois. The Maytag factory there had just announced it was laying off 1,600 workers and moving its operations to Mexico. He met with the union leaders, men in their late 40s and 50s, who felt betrayed. They had taken pay cuts, the town had given the company tax breaks, and they had one of the most productive plants in the company. But it was never enough. A CEO, in a distant boardroom, had decided he could make more money by paying workers in Mexico a sixth of what they made. One man, Tim Wheeler, who had already lost his job at a nearby steel plant, told him his son Mark needed a liver transplant. His health care benefits were used up, and he didn't know if Medicaid would cover the cost. As he spoke, his voice cracked. His wife buried her head in her hands. Obama writes, "Those were the stories you missed on a private jet, at 40,000 feet. These two stories, Google and Galesburg, represent the two Americas of the globalized winner-take-all economy. For those with the right skills and education, The rewards have never been greater. For those whose skills can be automated or outsourced, the future can be dire. The question is, what do we do about it? He rejects both the hard-right view that government is always the problem and the old left view that we can simply erect trade barriers and defend every government program, no matter how inefficient. He argues for a new consensus guided by Lincoln's maxim: we do collectively, through our government, only those things we cannot do as well or at all individually. We should be guided by what works. What works? First, we must invest in the things that make us competitive: education, science and technology, and energy independence. This means rebuilding our schools with higher standards, longer school days, and better paid, more accountable teachers. It means making college affordable for every American and doubling down on the basic scientific research that fuels innovation. And it means launching a national mission to achieve energy independence, treating it with the same urgency that President Kennedy brought to the Apollo space program. But even if we do all that, it won't be enough unless we also rebuild our social compact. The old bargain, forged by FDR during the New Deal, rested on 3 pillars: a job that could support a family, a package of health and retirement benefits from an employer, and a government safety net like Social Security. Today, that compact is crumbling. The Bush administration's answer was the ownership society, which essentially tells people you're on your own. Obama argues this is a recipe for a more stratified, unstable, and unequal America. Instead, he proposes we modernize our social insurance system for the 21st century. This means strengthening Social Security, not privatizing it. It means creating a universal 401k system to help all Americans save for retirement. And, most importantly, it means finally fixing our broken healthcare system to provide basic coverage for every single American. This is the bargain he proposes. Americans are willing to compete, to work hard, and to take risks. But we can only do so if our government makes the investments that give us a fighting chance, and if we know that our families have a net beneath which they cannot fall. Of course, any discussion of America's future must confront the issue of race. Obama begins with a line from his 2004 convention speech that resonated with millions. There is not a Black America and White America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. He says that as a man of mixed heritage, with a family that looks like a meeting of the UN, he has no choice but to believe in this vision. But, he cautions, to say we are one people is not to say that race no longer matters. The statistics on inequality are stark. And he can recite his own litany of petty slights: security guards tailing him in stores, people tossing him their car keys outside a restaurant. He says that to think clearly about race, we must see the world on a split screen, holding in our sights the America we want, while looking squarely at the America that is. Things have gotten better, he insists, but better isn't good enough. He offers 2 paths forward. First, a universal strategy. What ails working-class blacks and Latinos is not fundamentally different from what ails their white counterparts: downsizing, wage stagnation, and failing schools. Universal programs that lift all boats, better schools, jobs that pay a living wage, universal health care, will do more to close the racial gap than most race-specific programs. But he also acknowledges that some problems require special attention. He speaks powerfully about the deteriorating conditions of the inner-city poor. He tells the story of Mac Alexander, the owner of a beloved soul food restaurant on Chicago's West Side, who works tirelessly to hire ex-felons and rebuild his little corner of the world. Mac describes a community where the immune system has broken down, where kids are raising themselves on the streets because their fathers are in jail, and their mothers are still children themselves. For Obama, the answer is not to give up, but to embrace a both-and approach. We must demand more personal responsibility, especially from fathers, but we must also change the circumstances that trap people in a cycle of poverty. This means more effective policing, better schools, affordable childcare, and real job opportunities for those who have paid their debt to society. He also tackles the explosive issue of immigration. He describes the fears of native-born Americans, black and white, that what's happening now is different, that the country is losing control of its borders and its very identity. He admits he's not immune to these feelings. When he sees Mexican flags waved at pro-immigration rallies, he feels a flush of patriotic resentment. But then he tells a story of visiting a naturalization workshop at a church in a Latino neighborhood of Chicago. 1,000 people were lined up, clutching small American flags, waiting to begin the long process of becoming citizens. A little girl named Christina, 7 or 8 years old, came up and asked for his autograph. As he watched her translate his words into Spanish for her proud parents, he was reminded that America has nothing to fear from these newcomers. They have come here for the same reasons our ancestors did, for a better life. The danger, he says, will not come if we are overrun by those who do not look like us. The danger will come if we fail to recognize their humanity, if we tolerate a servant class in our midst, and if we allow our country to become so unequal that our democracy itself cannot survive. Finally, Obama turns to the subject of faith. In a secular age, he argues that progressives have made a mistake by ceding the language of morality to the religious right. He tells the story of receiving an email from a doctor, a devout Christian, who opposed abortion. The doctor was considering voting for Obama, but was troubled by language on his campaign website that dismissed all who opposed abortion as, quote, right-wing ideologues. The doctor wrote, "I do not ask at this point that you oppose abortion, only that you speak about this issue in fair-minded words." Obama felt a pang of shame. He realized the doctor was right. He changed the language on his website and began a deeper reflection on the role of faith in a pluralistic democracy. He describes his own journey. He was not raised in a religious household. His mother was a spiritual person but deeply skeptical of organized religion. His father was a confirmed atheist. It was only later in life, working as a community organizer with churches on the south side of Chicago, that he found his way to Christianity. He was drawn to the black church's tradition of social justice, its understanding that individual salvation is tied to collective salvation. And he was drawn to its honesty. Faith, he learned, doesn't mean you don't have doubts. The church was a place you went precisely because you were human, because you had sins to wash away, and needed an ally on a difficult journey. It was this understanding that allowed him to finally be baptized. He argues that for democracy to work, the religiously motivated must translate their concerns into universal, rather than religion-specific values. They have to make arguments based on reason, arguments that are accessible to people of all faiths, and those with no faith at all. At the same time, secularists are wrong to ask believers to leave their religion at the door of the public square. Great reformers, from Lincoln to King, were motivated by faith and used religious language to move the nation. Our goal should not be to scrub religion from public life, but to find a way to have a serious debate about how to reconcile faith with our modern, pluralistic democracy. It requires a sense of proportion, a dose of humility, and the recognition that on some issues, like abortion, compromise may not be possible. In those moments, the best we can do is ensure that persuasion, not violence, determines the outcome, and refocus our energies on areas where we can agree, like reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies. At the heart of the book is an exploration of family, his own, and the American family. He writes with touching honesty about the strains his political ambition placed on his marriage, especially after their daughters were born. He was gone 3 days a week, and even when he was home, he was often distracted. His wife, Michelle, felt like she was raising a family alone. He was stung by her anger, feeling she was being unfair. It was only later that he came to appreciate what she was going through. No matter how liberated he thought he was, when children arrived, it was Michelle who was expected to make the necessary adjustments, putting her career on hold, juggling work, and the endless logistics of childcare. She was torn between two competing visions of herself: the desire to be the solid, dependable mother her own mother had been, and the desire to excel in her profession. He realizes that his family was lucky. They had flexible jobs, enough income for good childcare, and a loving grandmother nearby. Most American families don't have that. If we're serious about family values, he argues, we need policies that make the juggling act a little easier: affordable, high-quality daycare, longer school days and after-school programs, and more flexible work schedules, including paid family leave. The book is filled with these beautiful, intimate moments of family life. His 8-year-old daughter Malia telling him she wants a simple life. His 5-year-old daughter Sasha's firm conviction that pink and blue don't go together. His pride and a little bit of sadness as he watches Malia on the soccer field, seeing for an instant the woman she will become. He reflects on his own absent father and his determination to be a father his own children could count on. But he is haunted by doubt. He has chosen a life that takes him away from them for long stretches. He tells himself he is doing it for them, to make the world a better place, but the rationalizations feel feeble when he misses a school potluck for a vote. In the end, it's a memory of Michelle that seems to capture the beautiful, messy, compromised reality of it all. A reporter once asked her what it was like being a political wife. "It's hard," she said. Then, with a sly smile, she added, "And that's why Barack is such a grateful man." As he writes, "As usual, my wife is right." As we come to the end of our journey through the Audacity of Hope, what strikes me most is that this is not a book about politics in the way we usually think of it. It's a book about the human condition, viewed through the lens of public life. It's a search for grace in a world that often feels graceless. The most powerful lesson, I believe, is what Barack Obama truly means by hope. It's not a blind, sunny optimism. It's not the naive belief that everything will turn out okay. In his telling, hope is a choice. It's a discipline. It is the courage to act, to reach out, to find common ground, and to believe in the possibility of a better world, despite all the evidence to the contrary. It's the audacity to believe that the cynics and the dividers don't get the final word. This idea is so crucial for us today. We live in a world that profits from our division. Cable news, social media algorithms, and political consultants all have an incentive to make us feel angry, afraid, and isolated. They want us to believe that the other side is not just wrong but evil. What this book offers is an antidote to that poison. It's a call to reclaim our shared humanity by practicing the difficult but essential virtue of empathy. His mother's simple question, "How do you think that would make you feel?" is perhaps the most profound political and moral challenge in the entire book. If we could all ask ourselves that question, before we tweet, before we speak, before we vote, our world would be a very different place. So how can you apply these ideas to your own life, starting today? Here are a few simple actions inspired by the book. First, practice active empathy. The next time you find yourself in a disagreement with someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, or someone online, resist the urge to win the argument. Instead, get curious. Ask them, "Help me understand why you feel that way." Listen to their story, not just their position. This is the first step toward finding common ground. Second, move toward the noise. Obama didn't hide from the anti-abortion protesters outside his rallies. He walked over and started a conversation. In your own life, find one issue you feel strongly about and deliberately seek out a thoughtful person who holds the opposite view. Don't try to convert them. Just try to understand them. You might be surprised by what you learn, not just about them, but about yourself. Third, find your own version of Galesburg. The source of Obama's hope wasn't found in Washington. It was found in the stories of ordinary people. Step outside of your bubble. Volunteer in a community different from your own. Strike up a conversation with the person who serves you coffee or cleans your school. Listen to their stories, their modest hopes, and their daily struggles. It will ground you and remind you of what truly matters. The Audacity of Hope is ultimately a deeply personal and philosophical book. It's a reminder that progress is not inevitable. It is fought for. It is the result of countless small acts of courage, empathy, and, yes, audacity. We've touched on the major themes today, but a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the layout, but it can't convey the feeling of the sun on your skin, the smell of the air, or the sound of the language. The real magic of this book is in the nuance, the quiet reflections, and the deeply human stories that Obama tells with such grace and honesty. If anything we've talked about today has sparked something in you, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it is more than just learning. It's a conversation with one of the most thoughtful minds of our time, and it might just change the way you see yourself, your country, and your own capacity for hope. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that this work is making a difference, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.